Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. I'm Sal Mercogliano. So we got an end of the year 2021 special, top 5 picks from myself and our returning champion, John Konrad, who started this all with us way back in March when we started What's Going On with Shipping. So I asked John to come back on with us, and John and I have each got our top 5 picks for what has been the year 2021. And we thought we'd share them with you, talk about them, and then go forward and see what's looming in the future for 2022. So first off, John, welcome back. Appreciate you being back on the show.
Glad to be here, Sal. I'm a big fan of the show. How many subscribers you got now?
We're just ready to break into 32,000. So we've been
2,000.
Yeah, we're doing pretty well. So and a lot of it is owed to you, John. So I appreciate everything you've done to help us on this journey.
I appreciate the shout out on your live show, and I hope everyone goes to your Patreon page so we can, we got to improve the set design there, Sal. As you know, those graphics in the beginning could be improved. Those could all be improved by our Patreon.
It's true. And again, we do have a Patreon page. Please, I'll have it up in the show notes and at the end of the show for you, so you can go to that. We appreciate any support you give to What's Going On with Shipping. All right, John, people came in here for our predictions or what we thought were the top 5 news stories for 2021. And so I'm going to have you start off with your number 5 story. Then I'll come in with our number 5 story, and we'll go back and forth here on who has got which story where. So John, you kick it off. Number 5 for you.
Right. Number 5 for me is an article I wrote, More Oil Spills from Golden Ray Salvage. This isn't a big one. It wasn't a huge headline for us. Only, got 4,000 likes on our, which isn't very much for gCaptain, but I thought it was important because it shows a lot of things that are happening in the background. First of all, the Coast Guard had originally designated Smith Salvage and some of their partners to this Golden Ray. Golden Ray was the big car carrier that ran aground they had some stability problems in Georgia in the United States. It was purposely put aground so it didn't capsize and close off the harbor of Savannah Brunswick, Georgia. And it took the salvage was delayed. Open 90 rules were really changed. The Coast Guard came down and said that the P&I club, the insurance, could change salvage, which led to a huge delay. And then we had an oil spill from the Golden Ray. They decided to do this thing, which originally with the tricolor, where they basically put a huge bandsaw. So they built a structure over it, and the saw went down underneath and cut, diamond bladed, probably the world's biggest saw, cut this thing in pieces, and they built a containment dome around it, which was completely different plan than Smith Salvage had originally gave. And obviously it was changed because I believe it was lower cost. But they intentionally put this in the water, right? As you're cutting, all of the car battery oil, the ship oil, the residue, and any extra cargo that was in the ship, all this hydraulics, there's amalgamation of toxic junk went down into the water, and then they built a containment boom around it, except the containment boom failed, and they had this big oil spill. So then they clean up the oil spill, and they go back, and they redo the containment boom, and then they have another oil spill.
And a fire. Don't forget the fire. They had a big fire on board too.
And they just keep doing the same plan over and over. So while it was a very small localized incident, I think it has huge illegal implications on letting these P&I clubs dictate terms and showing that the Coast Guard does not have the technical ability to really go in there and change it. And the U.S. Coast Guard is one of the best Coast Guards in the world. So this is a problem, throughout, and that the classification societies are allowing this to happen as well. If the Coast Guard does not have the expertise, And just when you have a bad plan, continuing with it. And it's not just this incident, but we've seen it with a number of salvage. Obviously, the big salvage is the Ever Given in the Suez.
Let's not jump up on our list now, because we got other topics to come in here. So we want to make sure we save those for our list. I agree.
What do you think of the Golden Ray?
I agree with you. You know, I had Captain Andy Jones on, the Menorcan Mullet, do an interview with me, and we talked about it. He'd been following that salvage from the very beginning, and you know, he characterized a lot of the things you just said about the, you know, the VBX 1000 or the VB 1000 doing the cuts there, the spillage into Brunswick Sound, and it's never going to be the same down there. And a salvage that was supposed to be cheaper is now going to cost them almost $1 billion by the time it's all said and done. And it's amazing to me how below the radar that story has been in the news. Not Brunswick, Georgia, obviously, not in that area, but around the rest of the country, it really has not, I don't think, resonated at all. And it's really shocking, because this is a type of accident that can happen anywhere at any time. And what happened in Brunswick could happen in LA, Long Beach, could happen in San Francisco, could happen in New York, it can happen anywhere. And I think, you know, I did a video on the NTSB report where I just kind of lambasted them because they really didn't do anything to prevent a future occurrence of this happening again. A lot of the issues that were identified, or not even identified in that report, weren't addressed, you know, and there's really nothing to prevent faulty ballast calculations from being inputted into computers. There's nothing to stop a ship leaving in the same condition that led Golden Ray flipping over in Brunswick Sound. And I think that's really the issue. I think that is the potential problem looming forward for them. So I think it's a good one. It's a good one for your number 5.
And I know you don't want me to say the Ever Given, but I'm going to say it anyway, because that shows what we can accomplish if the world's attention is on something and it's of something of importance. And this is the opposite. When the world's not paying attention, when media is not interested, it drags on for years. There are fires, there are pollutions, there's local impact to local fishermen, and this is what happens when the world doesn't care.
Yep,
that's why it's important.
No, I think you're right. So my number 5 goes in a different tangent than yours, is the container lines and the windfall profits they've been making this year. Early this year, we saw the IPO for Zim, for example, hit. And one of the things that we've seen over this past year has been the container lines, particularly the top 9 in those 3 big alliances, make record profits. I think the stat that gets me the most about this right now is that in the first 10 months of 2021, that the companies made as much profit in those first 10 months as those 9 companies had made throughout the past decade, from 2010 to 2020. And that amount, and I'm nothing bad about profit. Capitalist at heart. I'm all for profit. But it really shows you the shipping industry in many ways. Shipping industry is a pretty flat industry. It's thin margins. It's make or break profits. But then when windfall profits happen, they happen in big ways. We've seen this in the tanker market. We've seen it in the bulk trade, seen it in LNG and LPG, and now we're seeing it in the container industry. And I think when you see the profits being made by Maersk, by Zim, potentially by MSC, we just don't know, because MSC is a private company, so we don't know what kind of profits they're making. But a lot of these big firms, and even small lines, even Matson, for example, which is the 26th largest container liner in the world, but engaged in Jones Act trade between the United States West Coast, Alaska, and Hawaii and Guam, is making record profits. And the big question for me going into 2020 is or 2022 is, how do these companies either maintain these profits, because they like these profits, you got to admit, they love these profits, they want to see this continue on. How do they maximize their profits going forward? Because going back to those lean years is something they just don't want to do. And I think that really resonates for me as one of the top 5 stories coming into 2022. What do you think, John?
Well, I don't. What do we do if there's overlap here? Because my number 4 is similar, but I took a very different angle.
Well, let's go right into your number 4 then. Go ahead and let's good transition out then. Let's go ahead and roll into that then.
Great. Well, I wrote an article all the way back in January, shipping stonks like RIG, Transocean, Rig, get lifted in rising tide of trouble companies like GameStop. So we had this interesting thing, when in 2020 with the pandemic, we had actual crude oil went to below zero. So they were paying you, I think it was up to $30 a barrel. They would pay you to just take it, and then crude oil raised, and now it's over $80 a barrel. Yet the tanker companies, they had kind of hit this spike in 2020, and then they went down all year.
Way down. It was
way down.
It was almost like the cruise lines in March of 2020.
So, and then we had, we've talked about it here, DAC and Zim, and some other ones really had record profits. And at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, they flew. I mean, there's some of these double, triple in price. Rig, Transocean, offshore driller was under $1, I think, in 2020. And it rose over $3 a share in this GameStop. So tripled. And then nothing. And this is the big story. Nothing's happened. These have gone sideways. And only very recently, Wall Street has picked up on the fact that AP Moller Maersk is making record profits, windfall profits, and AP Moller has just taken off. I think it's up like 22%. It's at all-time highs. But Matson hasn't really followed suit. And Matson's at a PDE. I mean, you have these PDE, price to earnings ratios, the big Wall Street thing. You have, I forget what Apple's PDE, but it's like 30 or 40, something like that. I should really look it up. But Matson's price to earnings ratio is $6 or it's about 6 right now. So it's, even though it's gone crazy up, it's very small compared to the amount of earnings that they are bringing in. So Wall Street really hasn't priced in these earnings. And the Federal Reserve has come in and said that this is temporary. All of this logistics nightmare and the shipping thing is all temporary, that we have this temporary transitory inflation. And that is really baked into and these stocks have gone nowhere. And then you had the real performers, the small guys. You got Zim and Danios, ZIM and DAC, which have gone absolutely nowhere all year. And I was just looking, Zim, and I forgot, one of them it's a 1-to-1 PE ratio right now. It's less than 2, the other one. Jay Mintzmeyer's, who our stock thing is saying that Zim is going to have more cash pretty soon than the value of its stock. So it could buy all of its stock in the amount of cash that it has. So while these record profits have gone sky high, Wall Street doesn't know what to do about this. They're not following through with the investment. So the stocks are languid while these profits are going out. And I want to say the shipping companies don't know what to do. They're not really pushing the investment in new technology. They should be buying up startups. They should be buying up new ships. They should be, and there are a lot of reasons for this. They should be buying into new technology and green hydrogen and all these other things. They should be investing this windfall profits, because that's what shipping is. It's death for 10 to 20 years, and then record profits where they really had the opportunity to invest. In 2008, they took that opportunity and they invested in the mega ships and they invested in new business opportunities. And we're not seeing that investment by Wall Street or the hedge funds or the shipping companies themselves. So my story is the pocketing of the profits.
Well, and what I would say too is they're investing in some things. I mean, you see Maersk buying e-logistics. You see what was it? CMA, CGM bought their terminal back, Fenix back in LA
for a lot more than they had sold it for.
Right, and so I mean, they're making, I would argue, classic investments, they're really not going too far out. But like even Maersk is talking finally for the first time building new ships. They haven't built new ships since the Triple E's. But it's been really the technology, the fuel technology, it's been really holding them back. I think they've been waiting on that. And on the Wall Street side, we're seeing record investment right now in logistics. But where we're seeing that investment in logistics, just did a story about this. I got interviewed about it because there was a Wall Street Journal article on this, talking about investments in both software and hardware, basically investment in data collection and in warehouse production. Basically, let's improve logistics on shore, but you don't see that investment going into the shipping side. And I think that's really the big fault. And I think, like you said, I think Wall Street is leery about it because they don't understand it. It's not an area that they're used to putting their money in. But I agree with you. Zim, Danos, a lot of the non-owner operators, C-SPAN, Atlas, those are guys who are making money. They got ship charters out through 2025 right now for ships they're building. So there are firm commitments out there. Even if the market tanks tomorrow, there are some firms that have got commitments out there. And a lot of these shipping firms have locked in high rates right now for the long term. I mean, this is one of the things that's under the radar right now is container companies have been locking in rates over the next year or two at a pretty high level, much higher than it was pre-COVID. And while you may see spot rates return at some points to pre-COVID levels, you're never going to see kind of the standard rates. I think the shipping companies have gotten much smarter, and I think that's another element that needs to be talked about.
This data is interesting. They're not investing in this data. Trade lines of Maersk fell apart, and then you have IHS Fairplay fell apart. It almost went bankrupt 10 years ago. Then it got merged with Market. Now IHS Market's a 50 billion market cap company. Informa is selling off Lloyd's List and its data products for. Estimates are about $150 million. That went in bankrupt. They stopped the presses 5 years ago. And then FreightWaves raised $90 million, but it's really based off of the trucks and the other data. The shipping data of those sales is minuscule. And then you have companies that are killing their matrix. On the data side, Freight Flows, on the media side, gCaptain, and no one's knocking down our door to do investments, Sal. So you have all this cash that could be invested in the media and the data and all these things that we know are needed for the future, but it's just sitting in cash right now.
And you're seeing the potential for freight futures, container futures being talked about. The FMC has got this issue out there about data collection, and because it's been so proprietary, data has been so proprietary among the different shipping firms and logistics companies. If they can get that data across the ways, and you see companies that do that, but they do a small slice of the industry. They don't do it, across the whole industry. And I think that's a really important element going forward. All right, let me jump into my number 4. My number 4 kind of builds on your number 5, except I didn't look at Golden Ray. I looked at a series of incidents that have happened across the past year, but the one I focused on was Express Pearl off Colombo, Sri Lanka. And this was a container ship, a small feeder vessel, something that's across the world. We don't really see high visibility of these vessels. We tend to see the big, huge container ships coming across, the big Ever Givens and things like that. But across the world are these smaller feeder vessels. We're talking about 1,000 to 5,000 box vessels. And Express Pearl loaded a cargo, a kind of standard cargo, I would argue. There was nothing unusual about her cargo. But contained in her cargo was hazardous material, not unusual. We see this every day, hazardous material being loaded on containers. And she encountered an issue with the way those containers had been packed. During an ocean voyage, the containers started leaking. We started seeing a hazardous material leak happen. She reported it. She tried to get into 2 separate ports, one in Oman, one in India. The ports refused to allow her in. She went to her destination port, which was Colombo, Sri Lanka, but by the time she arrived there, she had a fire on board. And the fire was initially extinguished, they thought, and then it rekindled back up and the vessel became a constructive total loss. gCaptain covered this extensively in a series of articles that really demonstrated how the vessel went from, a small, potentially contained fire, similar to what we saw, for example, with Zim Kingston off Vancouver. But in that, 2 parallels there, Express Pearl versus Zim Kingston. In the case of Express Pearl, you saw the entire loss of the vessel right off the coast of Sri Lanka, a environmental disaster, I'll argue, that's going to impact that region for years to come. You saw a lack of any sort of oversight control by IMO and any of the agencies that should have had an active role in that. And then if you flip that with what happened with Zim Kingston in Vancouver, for example, you had the fortunate happenstance of several large vessels nearby that could help extinguish that fire. Two vessels that were involved in the ocean cleanup program. And a excellent salvage, I would argue. They salvaged the vessel. There was minimal loss, minimal impact on the environment. And the question is, what are the lessons we draw from those two examples? Because we know that a container ship fire like that can happen tomorrow. gCaptain has documented that. Mike Schiller did that great kind of retrospective a few years ago on container ships, from MOL Comfort to all the Maersk vessels that caught fire that we saw, and all the other container ships that we saw caught fire. But I think Express Pearl for me really captured the issue here of the dangers of ocean shipping and the potential it has for impacting shoreside events. So I'll turn it over to you, John. Any comment on that one?
Well, my last story was really about how, Informa gets $150 million, and then you have these data things. Windward's another one, just had an IPO, $150 million. But the data is only good enough if you have the story. It's story and emotional that gets people interested and investing perfectly. And if Informa is worth 150 to 250 million dollars, what's the most popular YouTube channel worth? And this is serious. I'm not joking. Like we're begging for Patreon for a thing, but with the Express Pearl, I had talked to the salvage team afterwards, and they said they didn't know what was happening. But a certain historian went and found out through these documents what was manifested on, and really changed how the salvage was affected, because they were watching Sal's YouTube channel. So people say, oh, what's a media channel and what's a YouTube? What's the importance of this? But this really drives that there are important people watching this thing and reading gCaptain, and it's self-serving, I know, but I'm here because I believe in the importance. And if we want change, we need the data, but we also need people like Sal to get on TV and really explain what's going on there. And that is a very sad incident, but the fact that a YouTube channel could have changed the entire salvage operation very quickly shows the power of this stuff.
Well, and I think
important.
It's funny too, because I got a comment back when I said something about Zim Kingston and I compared it to Express Pearl, and I had somebody in the industry who wanted to remain anonymous, not use his name, sat there and told me you are hyping this up. It's not a fair comparison. You shouldn't compare it to. And I was like, no, you need to this is the worst case scenario. If you don't react very quickly to an incident like Zim Kingston off of Victoria. But if you don't react to it, you get Express Pearl. That was the issue I was trying to highlight there. If you don't tackle a container ship fire with the zealousness that they did with that, and you can go back a year ago or 2 years ago now to Bonhomme Richard fire that we talked about, that's another incident where basically you didn't use the resources available to tackle it and keep it under control. And Express Pearl, what did not need to happen? Let's be clear about that. I think that's the most important issue here, is that incident could have been nowhere on the news. It should have been offloaded long before it happened. And instead, because India and because Oman pushed it off, and because there's no requirement to give ships refuge unless they're in distress, and technically she wasn't in distress at that moment, then they were able to send that vessel off. And instead, it now becomes a problem for Sri Lanka, who has to deal with this environmental disaster on their coast. And again, I think visibility is an important thing. That's something you've done with gCaptain for years now, is raise that visibility up. And that's what I do with my little tiny YouTube channel. So that's I appreciate that comment. All right, John, let's go to your number 3.
Right, my number 3 is article cited U.S. Navy ships are too small to defend themselves, says new U.S. Congress report. So this kind of ties into, we have mega ships and the military, and part of the problem in LA is we're building bigger and bigger ships, and the bigger the ships, the fewer ports and the more investment you have to go. And it really makes the whole logistics chain less nimble. Now the Navy's fighting with this opposite problem. This congressional report says that more investment has to be done in smaller ships, especially with convoys, with merchant ships, with deterring pirates. And the Navy's falling behind on that too, but also with the advanced weapon systems that you have with the USS Zumwalt and the carriers, they're saying, well, these things, the rail guns and things that are going to be needed to shoot these missiles are taking an enormous amount of energy. And we don't really need stealth or anything else. We need a huge generation of energy, which means more fuel and more size, more bulk, and thicker steel in order to defend themselves against these rail guns and stuff. So, I mean, this I don't know specific. You know a lot more about the specific target than I, but I think the big story for 2021, and it ties into the Zumwalt is rusting right now, $8 billion ship. They're the best plan to defend merchant ships that I've seen all year is to take, the Marine Corps said that they might take an A1 Abrams tank and bolt it to the front of a merchant ship to do anti-aircraft. And then you have the Boner Merchant Report, which came out and said, one of the things that there are absolutely no fireboats or salvage boats anywhere near America's biggest and most important port, San Diego. So, and the fact that Congress, which loves the Navy, which continues to approve these and give the Navy more money for LSCs and Zumwalts and everything else, came out and was critical of the Navy, new procurement and what they're buying. And why is this on a merchant shipping? Is the important thing is, as we are pulling out of the Persian Gulf, the void's going in, and Iran's being a lot more aggressive. These terrorist and pirate organizations are ramping up, and China requires a constant flow of energy tankers to get, for the production, and then has to move that production out to the world. So the big story for 2021 is not only the Navy having the wrong type of ships and what they're doing about it, but the untold story is that freedom of navigation is what has allowed China to build all all this consumer stuff and grow dominance. The fact that there are no pirates, there are no Iran, there's no problems in Afghanistan. The seas are safe, and that is because of the U.S. Navy and its allies. And now, as we're pulling out of the Middle East, and we don't have the ships available, we're not investing in the smaller ships for these new threats like pirates and stuff. The cost of shipping could go, or the risk matrix is going to go significantly higher because we may not have that freedom of the navigation. Which, I mean, this is a big geopolitical problem that's kind of bubbling out in 2021 and isn't getting reported very well.
No, I watched the interview the talk you gave with Lars Jensen. It was posted online. We'll have the link in here for people to look at. And, I was really floored. I remember you telling me about it before it was posted, and listening to Lars. And those of you who don't know, Lars Jensen is really kind of the container ship guru of all time.
And strictly commercial, not a Navy.
No, purely commercial. And one of the big issues he mentioned is one of the big variables out there.
It was number one.
Is if the U.S. Navy vacates its role. There's just been this past year 2 books published I think everyone should read. One of them is by Greg Easterbrook, Blue Age, and then the other one is Bruce Jones, I believe it is, How to Rule the Waves, which talks about how the U.S. Navy basically ensures freedom of the seas, how that investment in post-World War II naval and sea supremacy allows the rest of the world to benefit from that. Other nations don't need to invest in their navies as much. Because why? Because the U.S. ensures that freedom of the seas, ships can travel and trade can go. I mean, the greatest beneficiary of freedom of the seas from the U.S. Navy is China. There's no doubt about that. China is the greatest. They don't have to have a huge navy to ensure their ships can move. The U.S. Navy does it for them. Literally tomorrow, if a pirate attacked a Chinese ship, the U.S. Navy would respond in some way. And we saw that off the coast of Somalia. We see it right now with European vessels patrolling off the west coast of Africa and the Gulf of Guinea. Who's getting their fuel from Nigeria more than anything else? It's Europe and China. And we see that with anti-piracy patrols there. And I think you hit on a good one there, John. That's one I had not really thought about, but those two books that came out got a little bit of attention from the military side, along with the commercial side, talking about that. And again,
Peter Zehan's absent superpower. And what's
yep,
important, I think, about why I picked this specific article is you said if the Navy withdraws, and they're starting to, right, because of Afghanistan and other thing. But this article says even if they don't withdraw, even if we continue to put the money in, this money is not going. We will not be able to maintain freedom of seas because we're building the wrong types of ships
yep,
to protect freedom of seas in the future.
yep. And I think
Freedom of
that's
navigation.
that's the big issue. The volume of trade that's out there is increasing every year, except for post 2008 and post 2020, we saw a bit of a dip. But if you look at the review of maritime transport put out by the UN, we're seeing ocean trade continually increase, and it's exponential. It's increasing that volume, and we're going to continue to see that happen. And having that free open sea lanes are essential for that. So I think that's a great story to do. So my number three is the mess that is the port of LA and Long Beach. And I don't mean to be mean about that, but what I mean to say is the attention that LA and Long Beach has gotten. There's been several issues there. Let me first say, I think LA and Long Beach has done phenomenal amount of work this year in moving goods, record volumes coming out of LA and Long Beach. We've never seen so much cargo move through the United States ports as we have this past year, and LA and Long Beach has shouldered the big burden of that. We've seen that happen. However, I want to take umbrage with a couple of issues that they've done over the past year, and in particularly one of them is the queuing process. When the tension was finally drawn on LA and Long Beach, and there have been stories from the very beginning. I went back through the past year of gCaptain, started in January and went all the way up. And there were stories about the delays at LA and Long Beach from the very beginning, back in January and February, they started. But it really wasn't until September, that it really kind of peaked. And a lot of attention was done to it. And it's not until November that they issued what I would argue, the two controversial issues that I have with them. One was this queuing process, where they basically send the ships off out to sea. And to me, that's scheduling. It's LA and Long Beach lost the ability to schedule their vessels. They basically opened themselves up for any vessel that wanted to come, including ships that were regularly scheduled. And that threw the entire system off. They basically opened themselves up for any ship coming in. And what that resulted in was that huge logjam of vessels off the coast. Now, they're arguing it's pollution, but in my opinion, that's not the case. They just want to get that visibility, that visual of those massive ships at anchor and drifting off of Santa Barbara and Catalina away. And they've pushed them way out to sea right now. And then the other issue that I have with them is also got to be this element of the dwell fee, of this threat of using demurrage to get containers moved. Back in October, they announced on November 1st, they're going to issue a dwell fee for containers that are being imported. Just yesterday, they announced that they're going to do it for empty containers, and that's going to start January 30th. And they've delayed this dwell fee 7 times, John. 7 times. Every Monday they delay this dwell fee. I wind my grandfather clock by the delay announcement of the dwell fee now, because I have to do it once a week.
And how ridiculous this dwell fee is. I mean, we're talking big money for big money, because it exponentially grows.
It's hyper demerge, to the point, by the way, my use of the phrase hyper demerge got me a call from the Biden administration asking me not to use that phrase anymore because they don't like that phrase. But it's hyper demerge. It is exactly what it is. It's an escalating cost of, I think Mike Schuller came up with a cost of, was it $500,000 over like 100 days or something like that for a container? It's a threat. And I think the issue of a threat like that was a problem. And my issue I have with LA and Long Beach, and the reason I raised this story is the story that's not being told. And we're going to see this end of the year stories right now, is LA and Long Beach are going to tout record volume. They have record volume this year, but that record volume all happened in the first half of the year. It all happened prior to June. From July to the end of the year, man, they have slowed down, and they have slowed down immensely. And that is because they they're in a marathon, and the first half of the year they ran a sprint, and now they're huffing and puffing trying to catch up. And I think this bodes really poorly for what's going to happen in 2022, when all of a sudden we're going to see wave of cargo coming this way to beat the Chinese New Year and to beat the ILWU renegotiations that are happening if they don't get a new contract by the end of June. And I think LA and Long Beach have been playing kind of a little bit of a smoke and mirrors here in being upfront with what the real situation is. You know, they didn't go 24/7. And the reason they didn't go 24/7 is many reasons, but one of the big reasons is the terminals and the shippers didn't want to pay for that. They didn't want to pay the union to work 24/7. There's a lot of things that are behind the scenes.
One thing you're missing, and you continually miss, I keep watching this and you keep missing it, and I keep doing it, is weren't they just given a $5 billion loan that doesn't really have any clear guardrails or payback? So I don't know. They call it a loan, the Biden administration, but unless there's a plan to pay it back, I call it a handout personally. But I don't know the logistic. But they keep
I was going.
that money in this.
I actually have that too. I have that on my list, John. I have that on my list, and no worries.
Okay, go ahead.
So you know, I'm calling out LA and Long Beach for this. Now, again, I think this is also part of a larger issue where we defer to municipalities, not states, but municipalities, the city of LA, the city of Long Beach, to drive our national maritime policy. And, you know, we're allowing that to happen. You know, ports are run by either municipal governments or state governments, depends on which state you're in. And, you know, there's no federal coordination, there's no national policy here that drives that. And which means that, you know, the executive directors for those ports are the face of this. We've seen, you know, Mario and Gene out there all the time talking about this, but in truth, the power is not in their hands. It's in the shipping companies and it's in the terminal operators' hands. And those are groups you never see. You'll never see them out there. But behind the scenes, talking to people who work the docks, who work the cranes, who drive the trucks. And one of the things we're seeing here is there's a lot of sub issues at play here, the pileup of empty containers. And again, when everything's working fine, this does not resonate. We don't see this at all. We only see it when this contingency happens. And my problem is that the LA and Long Beach keep telling me everything is fine, everything's good. We've caught back up again. You know, we've got record profits, but behind the scenes, there's systematic problems that still are underlying this issue that have not been resolved going into 2022. All right. Feel free to comment if you like.
No, I think, you know, follow the money. You got that $5 billion and you got all this trucking backups. Now you have New York and New Jersey, the port of New York and New Jersey backing up, and the truck drivers are saying, we don't get paid when we're sitting in traffic line. So what's this $5 billion doing if it's not paying the truckers? And those truckers they can't come in with their trucks. You need special trucks with short cabs so you can turn, and the environmental standards. So $5 billion, let's buy them all new trucks and pay them for sitting in the parking lot you've created. But you look at the bigger money. I mean, you talked about half of it, which is these shipping companies are making record profits. And there are all these conspiracy theories. I don't believe in them, but I do believe in a conspiracy of inaction. You know, the conspiracies that are true are the ones where people just go, I'm not going to do anything. And I think that's what the big shipping companies are doing right now. They're not actively trying to create this problem, but they're not doing it. They're not doing smaller ships. They're not moving around ports, and who is? Follow the money. Who is buying, doing creative solutions? Who is moving to smaller ports? Who is, and it's the Amazons and the Teslas, and we've reported on that. And what's not getting reported on is the competitive advantage. And you've said it, but I haven't read it anywhere else. That it's the mom and pop shops that are getting it. This is a competitive advantage for Amazon and Tesla and the big guys. They are going to be the big beneficiaries. And I was talking to a Wall Street hedge fund owner, and he said, you know, I said, America doesn't have any big shipping companies anymore. And he says, well, it seems like that might be about to change. And it's going to change because Amazon and Teslas are frustrated. I mean, you had Home Depot leasing a ship, but these guys are frustrated with the lack of innovation, the lack of data, and then they go to the shipping companies and they say, let's move to other ports. And the shipping guy, no, Maersk, we got the mega ships, we're just going to LA.
Right.
And they won't play the game. So we may have some big shipping companies in the United States in the near future, but out of frustration.
But the historian in me comes out of this, and when I sit there and tell you
The
that
mom and pop is going to lose out, right? The small guy.
They are, and I mean, and if you look at the way this is structured, and we'll get to this in a minute because I got it also in another one of my points, is everything's geared toward the bigger companies. It really is. But remember, the innovation in shipping came from a truck driver back in 1956 that came up with the idea of containerization. And, maybe right now, sitting in one of those long lines, waiting to get into LA and Long Beach or Savannah or Houston or New York, New Jersey, maybe there's a truck driver who has that new idea coming in. I've said for a long time that the innovation in shipping is going to come from FedEx, from UPS, from Amazon, from Walmart, from somebody else who gets frustrated with the way business is being done as per usual. We need something different. And, I did videos on Target, on Home Depot, on Amazon, bringing in ships into different ports. And that's great for Amazon and the big box stores. It's terrible for mom and pop stores who have to basically wait for their container coming off at LA and Long Beach. And maybe they got themselves on a regular scheduled liner service, which means they get to move to the front of the line at LA and Long Beach. Or maybe they put them on one of these spot charters from One High or one of these other companies. But now they're sitting out there 60 days waiting to get a berth because they arrived off LA and Long Beach and they don't have a schedule. And they have to wait for a berth to open up. And so I think
this is why it's not on my top 5, Sal. And this is going to be controversial. It's not anywhere on my top 5 because it's a few ports. There are plenty of ports that are open, that are ready to do business. You talked about Boston and Oakland and then a few of the others.
Oh, yeah.
And it's nothing new. News is new. The fact that the corporations, Maersk and Amazon, are getting better competitive advantage and higher profits from this. And the government's not doing anything. Marriott hasn't even visited the port of LA, or Maritime Administration. That's nothing new. This has been going on for decades. This is abandoned ocean.
Yep.
This is not new. It's new that it's in the news, but the fundamentals that the big companies are winning out at the expense of the small, that's not new.
PMA in their November newsletter, which was shocking to me, put out a November newsletter, and they do always a monthly kind of update, and I read it, and it's a great source. People should really read it. But one of the things it is, they look at ports, and they dinged LA and Long Beach quite a bit for a couple of issues, not the least of which is a decrease in productivity. They're down over 8% in October and November because one of the issues are they're prioritizing empties, getting the empties out, something we've talked about and something I cited in a video. They're bringing in sweeper vessels. They're bringing in these smaller vessels to sweep up these empty containers, but it's not so much to increase the productivity of LA and Long Beach. It's because the shipping companies are screaming for empty containers in Asia because they don't have any boxes to load. And so now they're coming in and sweeping them up and getting them across so that they can get this 2022 rash coming. Boston is criminal. Let me be clear. The Boston just invested in dredging that harbor, putting in new, huge gantry cranes to handle large container ships, and they have been shut out by the big
John
carriers.
Konrad invested because I live in Massachusetts. My Massachusetts tax.
Well, and they're the only port I think right now in negative percentages. I mean, substantial negative percentages in terms of containers. And that's a way to alleviate the congestion in New York, New Jersey, and Savannah. But we know the big carriers love these big ports. They love to go into one port. If they can go into one port and dump most of their containers, that's better for them. It's less port charges. It's faster.
There's no leadership. It's not going to change unless the FMC and Marriott get together with Congress and someone starts directing traffic.
Yep, and we're going to come back to that. All right, John, you're number 2.
My number 2 here is, let me pull it up. Congress calls to shut down cadet shipping and says the maritime industry is toxic. So Midshipman X scandal, a very brave midshipman student, young lady at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. She went out on a Maersk ship and allegedly was raped by one of the senior engineers on board that ship. And there was cover up and there was mistakes. And then, when she came out, it realized all of these other women came out of the woodwork. saying that, hey, me too. So we shipping has had or is having right now its big Me Too movement, and it's growing steam. You had a California maritime professor last month come out and write an exclusive article at gCaptain that she too was sexually harassed and raped aboard ship, and now you have um, a young lady at Cal Maritime who's talking about the abuse that she did and the loss of the superintendent. And Mara keeps saying, keeps focusing on Kings Point and keeps trying. And they've been trying to save this for over a decade, but they haven't brought it into the wider circle. They haven't. But what's changing now is Pete Buttigieg went to IMO and said, first, let's say one of the flag states went to IMO and got shouted down, saying we need to put in these anti-rape and sexual harassment things into the code. International Maritime Organization, by the UN, and got shouted down. I saw some of the private emails the leader of this flag state got, and they were horrible. But then Pete Buttigieg steps up and talks to IMO too, and the Coast Guard hasn't been doing much, to investigate. There've only been one fine paid by one of these huge multi-billion-dollar conglomerates. I think it was a $10,000 fine. And then Pete Buttigieg's office went in and said, we have to do something. And Coast Guard Investigative Service created a new app, and they're pushing it. A lot still needs to be done, but this is also, the broader story is also the seafarers getting stuck, being pushed out of the port of LA. So if a seafarer right now has a heart attack, a couple months ago, get on a launch and you're in an LA hospital within the hour, the golden hour. Now, because they're 100 miles offshore, 200 miles, you have to wait for a helicopter. There are people going to die on these ships because of the actions of Gene Soroka and the Marine Exchange and PMA in California. And it just goes to this lack of caring. Why didn't the big shipping companies, this Midshipman Act was on a Maersk. Why didn't Maersk address this last year? And what are they doing to address it this year? Why is this pushing these mariners offshore not a concern? Why Frank Coles, who is CEO of one of the largest crew management companies in the entire world, quit to go in and just rail against this? And there's still not much action being taken. But let me tell you, there is a swarm of activity, particularly among the women's groups. I mean, the women were a tiny fraction of this industry just 5 years ago, and a minuscule amount of the influence and authority. And they've really banded together with Women Offshore and WISTA and Sea Sisters and a number of others. And they're promoting each other, and they're actually, these things showing each other jobs and how to get these jobs and jobs of influence, jobs of leverage. And they're getting into the IMO, they're getting into MARA, they're getting into Pete Buttigieg's office. And it's making a real difference, but there's still that drag on it, right? There's still the fight back. But for Congress to come out and say, not just Kings Point, not just Maersk, not just the entire industry, it's toxic. And it was signed by 6 senators of different committees. I mean, this is big.
No, I think, let me be clear. I think the Midshipman X story that you ran on gCaptain was the factor that changed this a lot. We know, being in the industry, that SASH, sexual assault, sexual harassment has been going on for forever. I mean, against females and males equally on ships. And the fact was, you and I both were contacted and asked our opinions about this. And I basically told somebody pretty high up in the government that if I'm on a ship and I spill 10 gallons of oil, I am immediately going to be boarded by the EPA, by the Coast Guard, by state officials, by God knows how many other entities and organizations. And there's going to be an investigation in which I can conceivably lose my license. But if I'm sexually harassed on a vessel and I call, there's no response. There's nothing. There is nothing at all. And I got challenged by a Coast Guard captain about this. And I told that Coast Guard captain specifically, go back and look for the past 10 years, how many sexual assault, sexual harassment cases there have been filed in the Coast Guard and investigated on board U.S. merchant ships. And what we've seen, thanks to you, thanks to the Midshipman X, thanks to a group of people, is a announcement by the Coast Guard about the fact that the Coast Guard Investigative Service will do boardings and investigate this, that there's a 24/7 hotline to call, there's an app to call, there's attention to this. I will raise everyone's attention to a podcast.
But there's still not an arrest.
Still not an arrest. But I'll tell you, I listened to a podcast done by Ali Sedino with Women Offshore by 6 merchant marine cadets, female. And I called Ali right after I listened to that. And I was just floored by how powerful that podcast was. And I'll have it in the show notes right here for everybody to listen to. And these were 6 cadets who went out, and all 6 of them experienced sexual assault, sexual harassment of some kind. And unfortunately, they had reported this and it went nowhere. And I think the other point you made is very important. It doesn't just happen at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. It happens at the state academies. It happens in the industry in general. And what's worse is if it happens on American ships, it's happening on Panamanian ships, Marshall Islands, Liberian, you name it. And the plight of the mariners out there are just forget them. And that's what drives me crazy about LA and Long Beach pushing the ships off, is they just don't care about the mariners, it appears. Now, they say they can do crew changes. They say they can come in as they needed to. But in truth, if you wanted to do something better, then create a schedule that doesn't put a ship out at sea for a period of time longer than it took Columbus to cross the Atlantic in 1492. But, we're going to keep ships at sea for 40, 50 days until we have a berth available in LA and Long Beach. And it's that indifference that drives me insane. And I think the story you made with Midshipman X and what's going on here is important. But like you said, it's nowhere near solved, and it'll never be solved. And
it's
that was
not me in this dichotomy. What is your comment on the dichotomy? Because this is taking action not because of us. It's because of Pete Buttigieg, Department of Transportation Secretary is number 2, Polly Trottenberg and Lucinda Leslie are pushing this and making for action. But they are pushing it in the state schools, and probably someone thought that my number 2 story would be how bad of a job they're doing, because they're really not doing much with LA and everything else. And you and I have been highly critical. So do we give them a thumbs up or thumbs down to Marriott? What do you think?
Let me be clear. You and I have been kind of harsh on Marriott and Lucinda Leslie, the acting administrator. But I will tell you, she has taken this issue by the throat, and she is going full force to make changes, and I salute her on that one. I really do. I think it needs that level. Polly Trottenberg, the deputy Secretary of Transportation, who came from New York, has also taken this on, and it's gone up to the highest level. And again, I think it's good. It needs to be done. It needs to be this attention. 2 white males talking about this issue needs to happen. It really does. It doesn't need to be just women talking about this. But what we need are the shipping companies. What we need are the flag states. What we need is IMO. What we need is the enforcement agencies. Coast Guard has 11 missions, and unfortunately, those missions take up a lot of their time. They're the smallest operating military force there is in this country. But when there is a sexual assault, sexual harassment, it needs to be investigated. It needs to be investigated. They need to know that the Coast Guard Investigative Service, the Coast Guard version of NCIS, is coming on board and going to knock on doors and find out what's going on. And, people need to lose licenses over this. Masters, chief engineers need to be responsible for their crews, not just for their actions of turning left and right and dumping oil in the water, but for sexual harassment. It's a small vessel, it's 20, 30 crew members on board.
And not just masters, but executives.
Yep.
We had the Lacasio where the captain was just arrested, and then no one watching over the ship has been arrested.
Yep.
Right?
It has to go back to
criminalization of the mariner continues.
It has to go back to the corporate office. It has to go back to the personnel. It has to, if you're continually putting complaints about a mariner in there about repeated offenses, and you keep sending that mariner back out to the ship, you are responsible for that. Whoever is sending that person back out is as equally responsible as that person for doing it. And this is the element that needs to be done. And again, I think it is so essential that this be done at multiple levels. All right, let me get to my number two, which is going to be a surprise because I think you would think it would be something different. But my number two is the Ever Given. I'm going to put the Ever Given as number two. That's what started this crazy ride for me, at least, was Ever Given going ashore in the Suez. And thanks to you, young man, John Konrad, I all of a sudden found myself on BBC World News talking about this and starting a crazy week in my life and starting this channel in many ways. But I think Ever Given for me is really important because I think it beyond just the 6 days and what it involved is it demonstrated to the world ocean shipping in a way that we hadn't seen before. Where we'd seen it before was disasters, was accidents, was Costa Concordia, was Exxon Valdez, where these huge disasters that resulted in loss of life and massive damage. Ever Given was different. It could have been much worse. Let's go. You and I did this where we talked about the salvage of that vessel. But I think it showed, a human accident. We were pretty sure it's human nature, the pilot and the master disagreeing, weather event. But all of a sudden, the world trade stopped because we had built a vessel the size of that was bigger than the canal itself. And for 6 days, we didn't know it was 6 days, but it wound up being 6 days, world trade was stopped. And then all of a sudden realized, well, wait a minute, well, how's a ship stuck in the Suez going to impact me in Massachusetts or North Carolina or California or Kansas or in Argentina or England or in South Africa? And it does. And, it added to these chain of events that we saw happening. And I think more than anything else, what Ever Given did beyond the memes and the little digger and all that fun stuff that we joked about is it really demonstrated the absolute crucial role that ocean shipping plays in our daily lives that for us is behind, for most people, not for us, but for most people is behind the scenes, and they don't realize how important it is to their daily lives. So that was my number two. What do you think?
I think it's critically important. I think, there's not much more to say about it, except the fact that I planted the seed, but when the BBC saw how good you were, and then everyone else watched that episode, I mean, suddenly you're on Fox News and CNN and every channel. So your ability to explain this is amazing.
Some people have 15 minutes of fame. I had 6 days, so that was my limit right there, and then it went. So, all right, John, we have gone through our top four so far from 5 to 2, and so we're coming up on our very top issues for 2021. So, John, what is your number one issue for 2021?
Number one, well, I didn't plan this, but it aligned. It's not what you're going to expect. I don't think anyone could have predicted this, and it's strange that our number one article is not safe for work, and there are naked people in our top article. So you believe that or not. So if you got kids, I don't know if you're going to show it, probably not on YouTube. So we'll do the click so you don't have to, this is a family show, but it's an article, not safe for work. Ocean rebellion attacks IMO again and again and again. And then there's another article with this that I wrote June 1st. Watch Black Trail, the new documentary film nails the IMO on carbon emission. So this film came out that the ship owners came out and said what they're doing or not doing to solve the global emission, and came out very honestly. And this group of investigative journalists went down and they went after the IMO. They actually beat down the door of the Secretary General's house and dragged him out and asked him these very difficult questions that he just could not answer, and the IMO could not answer. And then this ocean rebellion, which has been going on for years, but really took last year, the Wakashio ran aground in Mauritius, this beautiful island, and the IMO sent a representative who, among other things, told the people that the oil that was polluting their beaches is edible. You could eat it. I mean, and IMO did nothing. And then this was Forbes article. It was on the homepage of Forbes. And what did IMO do? They went out and they did complaints and got the journalist Nishan removed from Forbes. And then this documentary comes out, and what does IMO do? The Secretary General is attacked it out. He goes, I'm going to respond. I'm going to get in front of this. I'm going to respond. And does he? No, he does not. It also came out that the person in charge of the IMO policy and the guy doing all this is a 2-star U.S. military flag officer. And
the former Coast Guard JAG, I believe it is.
The head of legal. So there are a lot of things that they can do. And then this Midshipman X thing came out, and the delegate said, we have to do something. And it wasn't this individual. IMO came and we're not doing anything against sexual harassment. And then Pete Buttigieg goes to the IMO and says, I mean, really stamps their video of him saying, we have to address sexual harassment and seamen's rights and a host of other things, climate change. And then it's people said this is a fart in church, where everyone's like, oh my God, but it was really a fart in a gale, because nothing happened. The IMO did nothing, just got murdered these years with attacks. And the biggest story was, my personal dealings with the IMO this year. I went off the rails for the first time because, we have a good working relationship and I want to help the IMO. But the Ever Given slams up against the Suez, right behind the Ever Given. There's a Merce ship that put on the brakes and did amazing seamanship to avoid the incident. You had Salvage, you had no one killed, and then you had salvage ops, and so many things going right. And the media is beating down your door, it's beating down my door, it's beating down everything else. I wrote one little thing that mentioned the IMO is critical, and the IMO attacks me, calls me out on that. And then I said, why am I on CNN? Why is Sal on CNN? This is the IMO has millions of dollars in budget and a whole PR department that just talks about their internal things and what's going on inside the IMO. There's no leadership in this country. And unlike Marriott, which I'm very critical of, their complete lack of response in the LA, Long Beach, and so much they're dropping the ball. But at least they have one issue where, man, they championed the seafarers and the rights and went at it. IMO, they have a resolution. Finally, they passed a resolution on sexual harassment, but there's no reporting on it. There's no Freedom of Information Act of the IMO. This is a UN body. And these people with Ocean Rebellion, they've been protesting. They literally brought gasoline to the IMO and lit the sidewalks on fire. And nothing happened. So they came back and they all got naked outside the IMO, and still nothing happened. I mean, we had naked breasts on gCaptain, these beautiful women and men just out there naked, and it's only got 3,800 responses. And the thing is, the industry doesn't care because they're like, IMO's broke. Why do you even write about this? They're broken. Like, everyone knows it's broken, so no one does anything. And we can't get forward with the 2030 emissions. We can't build more ships. We can't fix the logistics issues because we don't have more ships, because IMO can't figure out what technology is going to be used. They don't come out when it's good. They don't come out when it's bad. It's just a vacuum of leadership that's could fix so many of these problems. And the shipping companies are attacking them. The Intercargo came out this year and said, the flag states only recover like 24% of black boxes. IMO, please investigate us. Can you imagine you had an incident and there was a fender bender and the police didn't show up and it was your fault, and then saying, I want the cops to come. Can you imagine Sal better going, are you going to call up the IRS and say, hey, IRS, I think I did my taxes. I know I messed up and I screwed up my taxes. Can you come and look at it? This is what Intercargo and did. Like, please investigate us more.
This would be akin.
Did nothing.
It'd be akin to a student coming to me and say, no, sir, I don't deserve that grade. I deserve lower. It's not going to happen. And let me be clear, John.
But even more lower, I want you to sit with me and show me all of my mistakes I've done all semester and then lower my grade if possible and fine me and kick me out of school, because that's what the IMO could do.
I did not expect you to go naked people for your number one, but let me be clear about the story. Number one, the Wakishio story and the IMO
naked people
and,
with gasoline
uh,
lighting the sidewalks of London on fire. It can't get action from the
no, I
IMO
think it will now. I think somehow I think the link to the story now will get some traction right now. But that IMO story of the IMO rep in Mauritius was amazing. I mean, the video is just incredible of that IMO person talking. It's just it's you have to watch it to believe it. You really do. And the lack of action from the IMO on multiple things. And then I'll go even a little further than what you talked about too. The shipping companies not taking advantage of moments like Ever Given to talk about these events.
Why isn't Sean, the CEO of Maersk, why isn't he at IMO sitting down in a workshop? Why isn't he at the MARAD? When was the last time a major shipping company has been to MARAD and met with, Budacek and Polytronenberg?
Where are they on LA and Long Beach? Why are they not talking about this again? You and I had this issue with Maersk.
Because they thrown up, they said, IMO's broken. Everyone I talked to says, IMO's broken, MARAD's broken. Why are you wasting your time? Because
and they're
the ones who can fix it.
And they're terrified of visibility, even good visibility. Again, you argued this. The guys at Splash 24/7, the guys at Lloyd's List argued this, that they should came out, the company should have come out during Ever Given and talked about what's working right, what's happening here. But they hid behind press releases, they hid behind everything. And the reason I come out, who had no connection at all to any maritime company, is because I would talk and give some perspective on this. They would not come out unless it was a PR person who's basically reading a press release come out. And that's what IMO has turned itself into.
I won't name names, but a very pro ship owner, very pro IMO organization, after Ever Given came out and said, why the hell am I answering press calls?
Yeah.
It was extremely, and this is the just ship owners are yelling, and I'm like, when I write a story about IMO or MARAD, there's no one saying you're wrong. Like when I write about the Navy, a bunch of naval officers, you're missing the point. You're doing this, you're doing that. With LA Long Beach, they're saying these are the points that you're missing, Sal or John, and we correct them. And sometimes, it's but with IMO or MARAD, but IMO is bigger, right? And who are our delegates? Who are the U.S. delegates to IMO? I've been writing gCaptain for 15 years. I can't name one delegate to IMO.
No, they just did their election. They just did the election, so the U.S. is back on the panel again. They're Class A representative, but who's going to represent us at IMO? And again, is it the Coast Guard? Why is the Coast Guard representing the U.S. Maritime at there? Why is it not the largest shipper in the United States? Why is it not the head of the Maritime Administration? Why is it not whoever doing it? And I agree.
Well, the head of the Maritime Administration is going to be a Navy admiral. So
well, that's true too.
Who knows less about commercial than the Coast Guard? So
that's true. All right, John, that's a good number one.
What's your number one, Sal?
It unfortunately involves no naked people. So, John, I'm afraid my number one is going to be a letdown. But my number one is the lack of action by the Biden administration over this past year, just in general. You talked about IMO. I'm going to talk about the U.S. government and U.S. inaction over the past year. Now, I am not a rabid Republican.
Wow.
I'm not.
It's about this. We got to. It's the same exact number one, and we didn't plan this out before.
No. We have not talked at all. We made sure to do these all separately.
I just picked the international, and you picked the national.
I picked the national, and my issue was the inaction of the Biden administration. And again, I'm not Republican, not Democrat. I'm not picking sides here at all. I'm looking at the past year since January forward of inaction by the Biden administration when it comes to the maritime sector. It took them forever, for example, to appoint a Secretary of the Navy. It was one of the bottom of the list things they had to do. And even getting somebody as the head of the Maritime Administration was a bottom of the list priority for them. They finally just had a confirmation hearing for Ann Phillips, a one-star Navy admiral, to become the new Maritime Administrator. But now they got to reappoint her because the Senate went out of session and they didn't vote on it. So now they're going to have to reappoint. And we still, in the heart of the worst maritime crisis in the history of this country, since World War II, I would argue, we do not have a appointed, Senate-confirmed leader of the Maritime Administration who's supposed to represent U.S. maritime interests, who is supposed to do promote the U.S. Merchant Marine. How seriously, more visibility in shipping than ever before. What programs are we taking to capitalize on this, to get American ships built, to get American ships out there? Matson making record profits. What are we doing to help Matson or other companies to build new ships? Nothing. There are 2 ships being built in the United States down in Brownsville, Texas. That's it. That's the only commercial ships being built in the United States. CSSC, the Chinese shipbuilding corporation, built 194 ships this past year. That is more than the entire number of vessels in the U.S. fleet, and it's 2 times or 2.5 times more the tonnage than the entire U.S. fleet. And that's one Chinese shipyard over in China. And, what are we doing to do this? We talk about the idea that there's no oversight of this. We create these 2 entities, the Maritime Administration, the Federal Maritime Commission. But the Federal Maritime Commission has been neutered of its power over the years, 1984 and 1998. It has no real regulatory ability to enact anything over the ocean shippers. They can do fact findings, they can see what's wrong, but they really can't do much to legislate against it. And then we don't have a maritime administrator to go in there and help with, for example, the port grants. $2.25 billion in port infrastructure grants have been authorized under the infrastructure bill.
Please don't forget the $5 billion.
I'm coming to the $5 billion, but 2.25 billion have been allocated, and they're doling these grants out based on applications from the ports, and they're going to be spread out among 100 different ports, when in truth, there are 10 ports that handle the bulk of the American cargo that comes in. And it's great. It's great to give port grants to Cleveland. It's great to give port grants to a port in Missouri, for example, on the inland waterways. It needs to be done. But where's the overarching plan? Where's the master strategy? Are we just giving money based on good proposals from them? Are we giving out money based on, we need to give it out in a number of Republican versus Democrat states? Where's the overarching plan? And then, as you've mentioned before, repeatedly, $5 billion in loans given to LA and Long Beach. Do we want to double down in LA and Long Beach?
But there's no press release. So the public doesn't know what any of this is. I mean, look at the MARAD press release section. And then they send us, and I got on Mike Schuler a little bit for publishing it, but they send us because they want pats on the back for doing $12 million in the short sea shipping loans. MARAD does. And it's being spent on short sea shipping, which is the most important, I think, short sea distribution, 20 billion on ports, but $5 billion is just given, and 1.1 trillion for the rest. And our friends say who know this and who have read this whole bill say, it's primarily for trucks and trains and alternative transport and Tesla and and a lot of it's social.
This goes back to an issue I've talked about. Listen, the head of the FAA is a pilot, and not only is the head of the FAA a pilot, but he's appointed for a 5-year term. And so doesn't need to be reappointed as administrations change. Meanwhile, the head of the maritime, the road, and then the rail are appointed, but then they have to be confirmed, and then they leave when the administration changes. Those 4 people, the head of aviation, road, rail, and maritime, should be this kind of group, this 4-person group that directly advises the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, on transportation affairs. And the problem is that the Biden administration, number one, has been slow from the very beginning. They didn't acknowledge anything. It's not until September that they came out with anything about this. My most popular video was
just doing a victory lap. I thought it was solved.
Well, the Secretary of the Commerce just came out and said, we've fixed the supply chain problem by 50%. Where she comes up with that figure, I have no idea. But in September, my most popular video, the one I did that got my most hits, over almost 500,000 hits, was a video I did saying the government has a plan to fix the ports. We're doomed. And I got dinged by classmates of ours for sitting there and saying, oh, you're preaching, havoc and problems, but they didn't have a plan. Their plan was 24/7 in the ports. And we know to this day, 24/7 is not happening. It's not going to happen. Yet, if you go to the blog that the White House does, is
because they're
two
not
weeks.
giving the money to the truck owners to do that, or the ports.
No, they're not giving the money is not going
Where's
where it
that
needs.
5 billion going?
I don't know. They create this commission. Go back to what you talked about earlier. They create this 24-person commission, 12 importers, 12 exporters to advise the supply chain task force. Yet, if you look at who makes up that group, it's Amazon, it's Walmart. Where's the Chamber of Commerce of small town America on there? Talking about, okay, this is what it's like in pick any small town in America. Get the head of the Chamber of Commerce, put him on that committee, and let him represent the small businesses in there. That's not even on there. You put John Bakari, who had been the Assistant Secretary of Transportation, who, by the way, did not deal with the sexual assault, sexual harassment issue when he was in the administration. You make him the port envoy. That should not be John Bakari. He should be the head of the Maritime Administration, but you didn't have a head of the Maritime Administration. So you pulled John Bakari out. And now he runs these tasks. And if you listen to John Bakari, number one, you'll listen that if you listen to he got interviewed, I think twice by Bloomberg on their Odd Lots podcast. You would swear that John Bakari single-handedly fixed this by bringing together groups of people and solving it together. And if you listen to LA and Long Beach, they'll sit there and say it. Yet we know that the issue is still below the surface. You talk to truck drivers, you talk to mariners, you talk to everybody involved in this. The underlying issues are still there. The only reason this is not being worse is because the demand is going down after the holiday season. But we're about to see, starting in 2022, is demand's going to go up. Again, I talked about this. Chinese New Year is February 1st. So China's going to shut down for a week. They've already shut down because of COVID, the Omicron. And what that means is cargo is building up in Asia, which means that once they open back up, the floodgate is going to come like a torrent across the Pacific. You've got the ILWU, who's up for contract renegotiations by July 1st. That means every person who's shipping cargo is sitting there right now saying, crud, I can't take the chance the West Coast port shut down. I'm going to order stuff early, and I'm going to double up. And that means I'm going to haul more cargo in the first half of 2022. And then when you get to the second half of 2022, we're back at Christmas, and the surge is back on again. And again, where is the Biden short-term, midterm, long-term plan? Where's that national port strategy? Where's the national maritime strategy? What are we doing except for putting Band-Aids on these fixes? And let me be clear, there's been efforts to make changes. Passing an infrastructure bill, great. Getting money in the hands of ports is great. But are we just throwing money at this problem with no plan? Because in my opinion, if you're doing that, you're not causing a solution. All you're going to do is create future problems, because no one's going to want to throw money at it ever again, because the last time we did it didn't work. And that's why the Biden administration is my number one issue for 2021. So, John, comments?
I lost it a few days ago, as Cindy can attest, right before your live show. Listen, we didn't report on Merit or during, first it was the Bush administration, and then Sean Konrad was a big friend of gCaptain, but we were just getting started. We didn't really understand the intricacies. And then the Obama administration came, and they didn't even fill the slot for years. When they did, they filled it with a Navy submarine commander. In your last podcast, you mentioned that he was captain. He wasn't. He was a commander, which is a lower level than even captain. But then Trump came in, and he put 3 shipping people in the White House, in the cabinet, 3 ship owners in the cabinet. And then we put Admiral Busby, and they did all these things. And, there was a lot of outcry. We got more hate mail during those times because we report on it, and they say, the Trump supporters are saying you're being critical of these things with Trump. And the anti-Trump people are saying you're not being critical enough. And my inbox overflowed. But at least, there were some things that were highly, like the Cato Institute, which is a Republican think tank, libertarian, they say, but it's really right-wing. They had billboards against the Jones Act, and people were crying like, what is the Trump administration going to do about this? And they didn't do anything about that. But that was like, they said they weren't going to do much about it, and they supported the Jones Act. But that's like, And then other things, they poured money into the Ready Reserve Fleet and this operation, and a lot of the peace-loving liberals said, "Well, why are they giving all the money to military ships instead of commercial ships or environment or short sea shipping?" Because but I'm like, that's what Americans voted for. We knew what we got, and they went out and they tried, right? Busby tried to get, and a lot of that was failed, but at least they were following a game plan. What's driving me nuts about Marriott right now is their game plan. They bring in Ann Phillips, who's an environmentalist, wants to prevent global warming, which is leading to sea level rise. She has this multi-billion-dollar plan just for the state of Virginia to put out floodgates in Virginia.
Critical issue, very important issue, not denying that at all.
But it's got nothing to do with shipping. But that's what the Biden administration wants,
Yep.
and that's what voters voted for. So that's what is going to happen in my mind. But then I get this story 2 days ago that McDonald's bought a fleet of 747s to fly potatoes to Japan because there's no export capacity. There's so few. I won't go into the whole thing. We can't get the containers into the ports and out of the country. So McDonald's and Nathan at Flex Board was very kind in the tweets to, even though they helped arrange a little bit of this, talk about the carbon emissions of this, like the number one cause of global warming. It's like these ships are 100 times more efficient. So you have 100th the efficiency, and planes are very good at chips, like very expensive, very lightweight. They're great at computer chips. That's what the DHL and the freight things do, because they're highly pilferable and they have a very limited shelf life. And continue to do those on trains, but you don't send wet potatoes on planes. That is an environmental disaster.
Well, but
and FMC sits there, and they're Democrats, and they're got this $1 billion plan to prevent global warming, yet they let planes take off from Idaho going to Japan because they won't fix the export container crisis.
Exactly. I talked about this.
At least Trump served the purpose of his party. Biden is going against the purpose of his party by letting these planes take off.
Well, it goes back to the issue of the exports.
It goes anti-corporation and anti-billionaire. How many McDonald's billionaires?
Biden administration,
every single metric, it's against the Democratic thing. This potato.
Biden administration came in and they announced their pro-Jones Act, pro-America manufacturing, and then you had the Colonial Pipeline.
Pro-union, they were going to big pro-union.
But then you come in, the Colonial Pipeline shuts down, and immediately there are Jones Act waivers to move fuel out of Houston to there are Jones Act waivers being put in by Vallejo, by all the big oil companies immediately. And, I had access to those waivers. I had access to them. I saw all of them. And there was a waiver to move fuel from Texas to California, a waiver to move Texas to California, nothing to do with the Colonial Pipeline. The Colonial Pipeline runs from Houston to New Jersey. But yet here, all of a sudden, there are these waivers coming in. And the Biden administration approved 2 waivers. Now, they approved waivers to the East Coast of the United States, but they didn't need to. There were 8 Jones Act tankers sitting on the U.S. coast. And again,
they were huge pro-union American labor thing. And Kamala Harris has huge donations from various seafarer unions and related. If they do these waivers, it seems to go against their core policies as Democrats.
And it comes to, you just
I'm
saw.
like you, I'm not political. I just want to see action done.
Yep. I'm looking at what the administration has done in 2021, and they are the administration. Since January 20th, they're the administration. You just passed in the House the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And, I've really not seen a affirmative from the Biden administration about this, because one of the things that this does is it's cross purposes. Let's understand there's cross messages being sent. On one hand, you have John Picari, who's supporting the Port of LA and Long Beach in these dwell fees, these hyper demurrage fees that they're talking about. And yet at the same time, the FMC is investigating hyper demurrage. They're investigating overcharging of demurrage. And so, what are you supposed to think if you're an ocean carrier? Well, on one hand, the government is supporting it. On the other hand, they're not. And the World Shipping Council that represents all these ocean shippers are sitting there telling everybody. John Butler got before Congress and sat there and said, well, if you force us to take exports, this is going to cost you more money on imports, basically threatening the US Congress with higher import costs. Yet right now, the Port of LA has shifted from shipping 2 empty containers with 1 full container to 3 empty containers with 1 full container. Why? Because these companies want those empty containers back in Asia to load faster and turn around. They will not take American exports because it slows them up. And the fact that you have to fly 3 747 loads of potatoes, which, by the way, let's be clear, that's how many containers we're talking about? A dozen, maybe 15 containers worth of potatoes. Not even that. And you can't get couple of containers of potatoes
and
to
they're
Japan.
Flying those 747s back empty, by the way.
Right.
I heard.
Because 747s, number one, are not being used too much right now because they're uneconomical, because they're fuel guzzlers. There's much more efficient air freight out there. They're using 747s because they got miles on them and they're available because they're not being used by commercial airlines. And this is what we saw at the end of 2020 to ship Xboxes across because there wasn't enough cargo capacity. And again, who is looking within the federal government at this entire issue holistically? Air, rail, road, and sea. It should be Secretary of Transportation along with the Secretary of Commerce, probably together looking at this. But who's advising them should be those 4 people right there. The 4 horsemen should be the ones that are doing it. But there's no maritime administrator. We just appointed, I think, a road administrator just got confirmed. I'm not sure if there's a rail one in there yet. I know there's an FAA one because he carried over from the last administration. And to me, this is the issue where, you talked, your number one was international.
But what's
my
crazy
number one is national.
How everyone now wants it. One of the problems with the U.S. maritime policy and why we have gotten into this, a big problem, why the U.S. merchant marine has been destroyed and the ports are a mess. A huge problem is that the Senate holds the ultimate power, and the House can do whatever they want. It's got to be approved by the Senate, and the Senate is not based on population. It's 2 senators per state. So the large majority, the biggest voting bloc in the entire Senate, the most powerful lobby in the entire United States, which makes it the world, is the U.S. agriculture. U.S. agriculture, because all of these farming states, they don't have social issues, they don't have welfare, they don't have a big priority, they don't have all of this infrastructure problem. They're just farming states, so that's their number one issue. So, and they want cheap transportation, so they continuously approve the destruction of Marad, and deregulation, so that their potatoes can ship stronger. So they've been doing this for decades, but now that they are getting in trouble. It's so far out of their mind. They've won so many decades ago. The price of transporting potatoes has gone down so that they've completely forgotten the importance of this subject. And now they can't even. This is bipartisan. Every Democrat, Republican agrees they want to promote exports, and everyone gets money from the agriculture lobby. And the IMO wants this. So even when all of the stars align, and this is why the potatoes drive me nuts. The Republicans want it, the Democrats want this, the environmentalists want this, when the biggest, strongest lobbyists want, even when all of the stars align, we can't get our act together.
If you look at the 4 biggest ports in America in terms of just the containers, it's California, Texas, Georgia, and New York. Or New York, New Jersey. That's evenly split. That's Republican, Democrat. It's just, it's not a partisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. And when you mentioned the Department of Agriculture, this past month, I just found out that the best database in the US government for ships is not the Maritime Administration. It's not the Federal Maritime Commission. It's the Department of Agriculture. Department of Agriculture has the best site I've ever seen on world containers and bulk carriers. It's incredible. They go to Clarkson, they get all that data. It was amazing to me. And
Maritime Security Program, who approves those? They want more ships so they can export the grain in the world.
It's agriculture, and agriculture is, the Maritime Administration has not put out an annual report since 2013. It is required for every federal agency to put one out. They haven't put one out since 2013. And again, this goes again.
And I heard a statistic. I don't know if this is true. I don't know if you're able to review this, but the highest level is GS-15 and SES. Yeah. There are more GS-15s and SES, which are a good military equivalent of a captain and admiral.
Yep.
There are more of them in MARAD than there are U.S. flag ships.
There's more admirals than ships in the U.S. Navy, so it's not surprising we're top heavy as everything. So I think we end up with a very similar but complementary list. But we did hit our number one was being international and national policy. John, let's wrap this up because we've gone kind of long. What's your prospect looking forward for 2022?
Right. I don't know. Some of these data plays are being big. Like I said, FreightWaves, the 90 million, IHS, Lloyd's list is 140 million. I'm hoping someone, comes out and we can, this will be on our super yacht because gCaptain and what's saying with shipping, someone will realize the importance of this and how it needs to be explained and get out there because, my chief complaint about IMO is, if you're not telling these stories, nothing's going to get fixed. And the amount of cash that these companies are sitting on and the stock, the stock communities, the hedge funds, no one's buying these shipping stocks because they don't understand the story because no one's telling it. So from policy to finance to Wall Street to anything else, our competitors are getting huge valuations because people are hungry for the news. So that's the biggest story of 2022. I'm predicting is Sal and John on doing this around the super yacht. Because if I was a major corporation, I would be buying if I was a major media, if gCaptain had the money, I'd be buying this YouTube channel. Like FreightWaves is buying up. I mean, what's up the truck? I mean, they're doing amazing work. They're tying this data with the editorial and driving public policy. It's powerful.
I think over guys at FreightWaves, they had over like 1 million downloads of their podcasts and content. They've been doing really good. I gotta agree. Let me go with my 2022 is number one. I don't think. There's a lot of predictors coming out here that it's going to be worse in 2021. I think it's going to be a busy year. Let's put it that way. I don't know if it's going to be worse or better. I think the first half has the potential to be the same. I don't think we're going to be out of this anytime soon. I think as long as the economy doesn't have a huge catastrophic collapse, if we don't have a recession like we did in 2008, we keep trucking along at the same level. I think trade keeps increasing exponentially. And it's not just us either, by the way. Let's remember, we're the US is a small portion of this. Europe, China, Asia, I mean, huge demand across the board. And, one of the things is China has this carnivorous appetite for imports, not just exports, but imports. It needs a lot of food. It needs a lot of ore. It needs a lot of raw material. It needs a lot of manufactured goods to go into its components it builds to export. And, I'd love to see more production in the United States, but I got to say, even with freight rates 10 times higher than they were, for most goods, it's still cheaper to ship than not to ship right now. Unless you're talking about high volume cargo, furniture, and, big pieces like that,
or potatoes.
Or potatoes, it's just efficient to do that. But I think the other big thing, and I'll echo on that, is the information on this. People are really hungry for the information on this. I got 30,000 subscribers, not because of this good looks. It's because people wanted more of the story than they were getting in a 30-second, 1-minute news bite. Now, this may be too much here, an hour and something long. This may be a bit too much. But, I think that's an element. People really want this. And the thing that gets me about the shipping industry, and this as well as I do, because you've been doing this with gCaptain for a long time, is the shipping industry is great to talk among themselves, but they're terrible to talk outside the shipping industry. They just don't. And to make the shipping industry understandable to the masses is a tough thing to do. And, I think people are really interested in it. They want to know about things, whenever given one ashore, they want to know about her. How, how do these ships get so big? What, who's on these vessels? What's in the boxes? What's going on is that there are conspiracy theories, but there are also people who just want to know. And so, I think in terms of you with gCaptain, me with what's going on with shipping, and all the other guys out there who do maritime and freight and logistics, we're definitely going to see 2022 be equally important out there. I think in the big term, I think we keep trucking along with records still yet to be broken. I think LA and Long Beach, for example, will have a record year again. I think they'll be a little bit more paced over the course of the year. I think hopefully they learn their lesson about that. I think the ocean shippers have realized they can make profits and they're going to keep trying to make profits. I keep hearing that, well, the ocean shippers want to return back to normalcy. They no, they don't. They want profits. They want to. How can they keep profits going? They know they can't keep them probably at this level, but they're going to ensure that.
And I have to disclose, I own a bunch of these stocks because I believe the amount of money is ridiculous. But I want to say, everyone, do not take my stock advice, but because I do have some real money in these.
No, and it's just it's our observation.
I'm biased, but I'm biased.
Yeah, it's our observation on the stocks, and again, it doesn't take, Greg Miller just did that great story over at Freightways for American Shipper, where he looked at stocks and the 10 charts for 2021, and he looked at containers, he looked at tankers, he looked at LNG, he looked at bulk, and so we definitely see that across the board. So, John, I want to thank you for coming on and spending about an hour and a half with us and talking about the top 5. We're going to get this out for New Year's Eve and get this out to the masses for everybody to digest. We can always, I know, follow you at gCaptain. Looking forward to some new stories coming up here for 2022. We're sorry Mike Schiller couldn't join us. We were going to get Mike on here to join us, but it's hard to hang with the top dogs like you and me, and I know we're intimidated.
gCaptain.com, follow me there. gCaptain on all the social media, and John Konrad at Twitter. And there's only one place to follow Sal, and that's Patreon, because you're getting that inside info, the extra. What do you give people? Extra rants, extra. Do you have like a?
Usually post the videos a little early for them.
Marad is messing up T-shirt. What do you
usually post the videos a little earlier when I can for them, so they get a little bit of a treat before the video comes out. But I need to do more for my Patreon supporters. And you can follow what's going on with shipping on YouTube. So please subscribe, hit the bell so you learn about.
Do the Patreon top supporters, are they going to get an invite to your super yacht when you get bought out? For
when I do get the super yacht,
$1 billion
we will have a party for our Patreon supporters. I guarantee you that.
That's worth it.
So be sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos when they come out. Subscribe to gCaptain's newsletter. Just hit 75,000 subscribers. It'll show up in your inbox every day. It's a great, quick little read on what's going on in maritime news daily. Be sure to check out my Monday episode, What the Ship is Going On, which kind of recaps the 5 top stories in news for the past week and looking forward to the next week. And I am sure you'll see John and I back together again sometime soon. So until our next episode, this is Sal and John signing off.